The racist police officer arrests a black man. Turns out he's FBI. Jamal Reed lounged on a sun-dappled bench in Evergreen Park, the city's green oasis amid the relentless concrete chaos of urban life, where towering skyscrapers loomed in the distance like silent sentinels, casting long shadows over the winding paths and vibrant flower beds that offered a brief respite from the hustle and bustle below. He flipped through the pages of a gripping thriller novel, the crisp paper whispering softly in the gentle breeze that carried the faint scent of blooming jasmine and freshly cut grass, while joggers in colorful athletic wear pounded the pavement with rhythmic footsteps. Families picnicked on checkered blankets with laughter echoing like musical notes, and children chased after frisbees with unbridled joy, their innocent energy, a stark contrast to the underlying tensions that simmered just beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic setting. This spot had become Jamal's personal escape, a rare moment of solitude and peace in a world that often felt inherently hostile and unforgiving, where every glance from a stranger could carry unspoken judgments, and every interaction held the potential for misunderstanding or worse, a world shaped by experiences that had taught him to navigate with caution and resilience from a young age. But today, that fragile peace was about to be shattered irreparably, like a glass pane cracking under invisible pressure, as an unforeseen encounter loomed on the horizon, threatening to unravel the calm he had so carefully cultivated. Across the expansive lawn, dotted with ancient oak trees whose branches swayed lazily overhead, Officer Derek Lawson cruised his assigned beat in a marked patrol car, his eyes narrowed intently behind dark, polarized sunglasses that reflected the afternoon light like mirrors, concealing the sharp scrutiny in his gaze. With 15 years on the force under his belt, Derek prided himself on his uncanny ability to spot trouble from afar, a skill honed through countless shifts patrolling these very streets where he had seen everything from petty thefts to more serious altercations. And in his mind, he was the thin blue line holding back the chaos that he believed lurked around every corner. When his eyes landed on Jamal, sitting alone on the bench, engrossed in his book, appearing far too relaxed and composed for Derek's liking, his instincts flared up like a warning siren, a gut feeling that he had learned to trust implicitly over the years, even if it was often colored by preconceived notions that he rarely questioned. Another one loitering around here? He grumbled into his radio handset, his voice laced with a disdain that came from a place deep within, influenced by the stories he'd heard from veteran cops and the media narratives that painted certain demographics in broad, unflattering strokes. The city itself had been a powder keg of rising tensions in recent times, with protests erupting sporadically over issues of unequal policing and systemic injustices, stories circulating widely about black residents being harassed for the most mundane activities like walking their dogs or simply existing in public spaces, incidents that sparked heated debates on social media and in community forums. But Derek dismissed much of it as overblown media hype designed to stir up trouble, though deep down, those very narratives fueled his hypervigilance, making him quicker to act on suspicions that might otherwise be dismissed. Jamal, sensing the weight of that piercing stare like an unwelcome touch on his skin, felt a familiar prickling sensation run down his spine, a sensation he had encountered far too many times before in his life, from schoolyards to shopping malls to professional settings, where his presence alone seemed to invite scrutiny. He'd grown up navigating these precarious moments with a practiced ease, stopped on sidewalks for fitting vague descriptions that inevitably boiled down to nothing more than the color of his skin, questioned about his intentions in neighborhoods where he had every right to be, experiences that had built a quiet armor around him, one forged from necessity rather than choice. As a child, he'd watched his father endure similar indignities with a stoic grace, the older man pulling him aside afterward to impart hard-won wisdom. "Stay calm, son. Anger only gives them the power they're looking for. Composure disarms them every time." Jamal marked his place in the novel with a deliberate finger, his eyes slowly lifting to meet Derek's across the distance. No flinch in his posture, just a steady, unyielding resolve that spoke volumes without a single word. A silent assertion of his humanity in the face of potential adversity. Derek, undeterred and perhaps even provoked by that unflinching gaze, approached with purposeful strides, his hand resting casually yet firmly on his utility belt where his service weapon and handcuffs hung ready, his posture screaming authority and command, a stance designed to intimidate and establish dominance from the outset. "Afternoon," he said as he drew near, his tone clipped and professional on the surface but undercut by an unmistakable edge of suspicion, his eyes scanning Jamal up and down like a scanner at a security checkpoint, searching for any sign of guilt or irregularity. Jamal nodded politely in response. "Officer," he replied, keeping his voice even and measured, his hands visible and still to avoid any misinterpretation that could escalate the situation unnecessarily. The exchange hung in the air like a fragile thread, polite on its face but pregnant with unspoken undercurrents, as Derek's mind raced ahead. Why is he so composed? Most people get nervous around uniforms. This guy's acting like he's got nothing to hide, which means he probably does. He keyed his radio again, speaking into it with a low urgency. "Got a potential suspect here. Matches those vague reports we've had about suspicious activity in the parks lately." The justification was flimsy. At best, recent reports of minor thefts like stolen bikes or unattended bags, with no specific details beyond general descriptions that could apply to half the population, but in Derek's worldview, it was more than enough to proceed. A thin veil of protocol draped over deeper instincts. Around them, the park-goers began to take notice, their casual activities pausing as whispers spread like ripples in a pond. An elderly woman sitting on a nearby bench clutched her handbag a little tighter, her face etched with a mix of fear and curiosity, unwittingly echoing the societal fears and stereotypes that Derek's actions seemed to embody and perpetuate. A young couple out for a stroll halted their walk abruptly, pulling out their smartphones to film the unfolding scene discreetly from a safe distance, their expressions a blend of concern and outrage, fully aware from viral videos and news stories how such encounters could spiral out of control in an instant, potentially turning tragic with one wrong move. Derek, oblivious or indifferent to the growing audience, pressed on with his interrogation. "What are you doing out here all by yourself?" he demanded, his voice carrying a hint of accusation that made the question feel more like an indictment. Jamal replied evenly, without a trace of defensiveness. "Just reading my book. It's a nice day for it, don't you think?" But Derek's suspicion only deepened, his mind interpreting the calm response as evasion rather than innocence. "ID?" he barked next, extending his hand expectantly, his stance widening slightly as if preparing for resistance. Jamal knew his rights intimately, no legal obligation to produce identification without probable cause in a public park like this, but he also understood the precarious reality of the moment, how refusing could invite escalation, heightened risks that statistics and personal anecdotes had drilled into him over the years. Weighing the options in a split second, he reached slowly into his pocket, movements deliberate and telegraphed to avoid any sudden alarm, and handed over his wallet. Derek snatched it with a quick motion, his eyes widening slightly as he noted the out-of-state address on the driver's license. "Not local, huh? That explains a lot. Mind standing up for me?" Jamal complied without protest, rising smoothly from the bench while keeping his hands in plain view. But as he did so, Derek's radio crackled to life with a colleague's voice on the other end, laced with casual humor. "Another park dweller causing issues? Bag him quick before he bolts." Laughter echoed faintly through the speaker, a jarring reminder of the precinct's ingrained casual bias, where such jokes passed as locker room banter but reinforced harmful attitudes that seeped into daily operations. Tension mounted palpably in the air as Derek, emboldened by the radio exchange, moved to cuff Jamal's wrists behind his back, the cold metal clicking into place with a finality that sent a chill through the onlookers. "This is straight-up harassment," a nearby jogger shouted, stepping forward with indignation, his face flushed with anger at the injustice unfolding before him. Derek barked back sharply, his voice rising to assert control. "Mind your own business, or you'll be next." The threat hung heavy, silencing the immediate crowd but not stopping the filming. As more phones emerged to capture the scene, potential evidence for later scrutiny. Jamal remained silent throughout, his mind flashing back to a litany of past injustices that had shaped his worldview. Being frisked aggressively during routine traffic stops where white drivers were waved through with warnings, followed suspiciously through department stores by security guards who assumed theft based on appearance alone, denied service at restaurants under flimsy pretexts. All experiences that weren't isolated, but part of a broader pattern he had learned to endure with quiet strength. This wasn't new territory for him, but it stung nonetheless, a fresh wound on old scars that reminded him of the constant vigilance required to simply exist. In the patrol car, as Derek slid into the driver's seat and pulled away from the curb with a screech of tires, he continued to grill Jamal through the metal grate separating them. "You look like trouble from a mile away. What's your real story, huh? Nobody just sits in a park reading like that." Jamal, gazing out the window at the blurring trees and paths he had enjoyed moments ago, responded with measured calm. "Just a visitor enjoying the park, officer." Nothing more to it. Derek scoffed loudly, shaking his head in disbelief as he radioed ahead to the station. Bringing in a suspicious character for processing might be linked to those theft reports. The drive felt interminable, the air thick with unspoken antagonism, until they arrived at the bustling precinct, where officers milling about in the booking area smirked upon seeing Jamal being led in, one of them quipping under his breath, "Park bench bandit strikes again? Lock him up tight." The casual mockery highlighted the deeper cultural issues within the force, where such attitudes were normalized, but Jamal held his composure, his calm exterior masking a brewing frustration that he channeled into patience, knowing that this ordeal was far from over. Little did Derek know, as he processed the paperwork with a smug satisfaction, the man he had so dismissively detained was about to upend his entire world, exposing not just a personal mistake, but a systemic flaw that would demand reckoning. The precinct buzzed with the usual activity phones ringing off the hook, officers typing reports at cluttered desks, the smell of stale coffee mingling with the sharp tang of printer ink, but beneath it all, an undercurrent of routine prejudice lingered, one that Jamal had sensed from the moment he stepped inside, his keen observation picking up on the sidelong glances and whispered comments that confirmed his suspicions about the environment he was now trapped in. Derek, pushing Jamal toward the holding cell with a firm grip on his arm, felt a fleeting twinge of doubt, a nagging voice in the back of his mind questioning if he had overreacted. But he quickly shoved it aside, rationalizing his actions as necessary police work in a dangerous city. Jamal, for his part, settled onto the hard bench in the cell, his mind already shifting to strategy, recalling protocols from his professional life that would soon come into play, his outward serenity, a shield against the indignity. As hours ticked by, with Derek patrolling the halls outside, congratulating himself on a job well done, the stage was set for a revelation that would shake the foundations of his career and force a confrontation with truths he had long ignored. All while the video footage from park witnesses began circulating online, drawing public attention to yet another instance of injustice in a city weary of such stories. The chapter thus unfolded as a microcosm of broader societal divides, where individual encounters reflected larger patterns of bias and resilience, building toward an inevitable clash that promised to alter lives forever. The smirks that had rippled through the precinct's booking room like unwelcome echoes in a hollow chamber began to fade into an uneasy silence as Captain Elena Torres strode in with the commanding presence of someone who had risen through the ranks not by chance but by sheer tenacity, her uniform crisp and her eyes sharp as polished steel, cutting through the casual banter of her officers like a blade through fog. demanding immediate attention without uttering a single word beyond her initial bark of authority. With decades of experience etched into the fine lines around her eyes, she had seen her share of mishandled arrests, botched procedures, and the subtle undercurrents of bias that plagued departments like hers, but this one struck her differently from the moment her gaze landed on Jamal Reed, still cuffed and seated with that unshakable composure that seemed to defy the fluorescent-lit chaos around him, his posture straight, and his expression a mask of quiet patience that spoke of deeper reservoirs of strength than any of the jeering officers could fathom. "What's the story here, Lawson?" she demanded, her voice booming with the weight of command. Her arms crossed firmly over her chest as she fixed Derek with a stare that made him straighten involuntarily, though he puffed up his chest in a reflexive display of bravado, replying with a clipped tone that masked his growing unease. "Suspicious loiterer in the park, Captain. Wouldn't cooperate fully when I approached. Fit the profile for those recent theft reports we've been chasing." Jamal met her gaze then, a subtle nod passing between them like a coded signal in a high-stakes operation, and Torres froze for a split second, her mind racing as recognition dawned like a sudden flash of lightning illuminating a dark sky, her features tightening as she processed the implications of what, or rather who, Derek had dragged in under the guise of routine policing. "Uncuff him right now, officer," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, a command that brooked no delay, and Derek blinked in confusion, his hand hovering uncertainly over his keys. "But Captain, that's a direct order, Lawson," she snapped, cutting him off mid-protest, her voice echoing off the tiled walls as the room fell into a hushed anticipation. The other officers exchanging glances that ranged from curiosity to discomfort, sensing the shift in the air like animals before a storm. As the cuffs clicked open with a reluctant metallic snap, freeing Jamal's wrists, which he rubbed absently while maintaining his serene demeanor, Torres pulled Derek aside into a dimly lit corridor adjacent to the booking area, her face inches from his as she hissed in a low, controlled fury. "You have absolutely no idea who you've just detained, do you? This isn't some random park-goer. This is Special Agent Jamal Reed from the FBI, one of their elite operatives handling high-profile cases that make our daily beats look like child's play." Derek's confidence, that rock-solid foundation he had built over years of unchallenged authority, cracked like brittle ice underfoot, his face paling as the words sank in, a cold wave of realization washing over him, turning his stomach into a churning sea of doubt and nascent regret, his mind reeling back to the park encounter where he had dismissed Jamal's calm as arrogance, his reading as a cover for something sinister, all based on assumptions that now revealed themselves as flimsy veils over deeper prejudices he had never fully acknowledged. Agent? FBI? The titles echoed in his head like accusations, forcing him to confront the possibility that his instincts were not the infallible tools he had always believed them to be, but rather tainted lenses shaped by a lifetime of influences from his father's dinner table, rants about those people causing all the city's problems, stories passed down like heirlooms that painted broad strokes of suspicion over entire communities, to the precinct locker room where jokes laced with racial undertones were traded like currency, reinforcing a culture that rewarded aggression over empathy and quick judgments over careful consideration. Back in the booking room, Jamal rubbed his wrists more deliberately now, his voice steady as he addressed Torres quietly. "Captain, let's handle this discreetly. No need to blow it up bigger than it has to be." A suggestion born not from fear, but from a strategic mindset honed through years of undercover work where maintaining control meant the difference between success and catastrophe, his calm serving as a direct challenge to the stereotypes that had led to his detention, disarming those around him by refusing to react with the anger they might have expected or even hoped for, thereby forcing them to confront their own expectations head-on. Torres nodded appreciatively, ushering him into her private office with a gesture that conveyed both apology and respect, closing the door behind them to shield the conversation from prying ears, where she offered a sincere expression of regret. "Agent Reed, This is utterly unacceptable. I'll ensure it's addressed immediately. Her words carrying the weight of someone who had fought her own battles against systemic flaws within the force, a Latina woman who had clawed her way to captaincy despite barriers of gender and ethnicity, fostering a quiet empathy for those similarly marginalized. Alone with her, Jamal allowed a small crack in his facade, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he replied, "I've faced worse, Captain. But it's the pattern that concerns me. This isn't isolated. It's symptomatic of deeper issues that erode trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve." His words a measured thrust that challenged without accusing, drawing from personal reservoirs of experience where he had witnessed colleagues in the FBI navigate similar biases, using his composure not as passivity but as a weapon to provoke introspection in others. Meanwhile, Derek, left stewing in the corridor with the echo of Torres's rebuke ringing in his ears, felt his world tilt on its axis, the smug satisfaction from the arrest evaporating like morning mist under a harsh sun, replaced by a gnawing turmoil that clawed at his insides, memories flooding in unbidden. The academy days where training modules on bias were skimmed over in favor of tactical drills, the late-night shifts where fellow officers shared stories that normalized slurs and snap judgments, all weaving a tapestry of internalized prejudice that he had worn like a second skin without ever questioning its fit. He eavesdropped briefly through the office door, catching snippets of Torres's conversation with Jamal, the revelation hitting him like successive punches: FBI operative, elite cases, respected figure, and in that moment, his defensiveness cracked further, giving way to a flicker of guilt that he tried to suppress by rationalizing, "How was I supposed to know?" He looked suspicious, but even as the words formed in his mind, they rang hollow, forcing him to recall instances where he had let similar assumptions guide him, overlooking white joggers in the same park, while zeroing in on black men like Jamal, a pattern he had justified as experience but now saw as something uglier, more insidious. Back in the bullpen, as word began to spread like wildfire through hushed whispers and sidelong glances, colleagues approached Derek with a mix of curiosity and caution, one veteran officer clapping him on the shoulder with a sympathetic grimace. "Tough break, man. Happens to the best of us." But the underlying tone carried a hint of schadenfreude, while a younger recruit, fresh-faced and idealistic, shot him a look of quiet disapproval, highlighting the generational divide within the force, where newer members pushed for reform against the entrenched old guard. Derek stormed into the locker room to escape the scrutiny, slamming his fist against a metal door that reverberated with a dull thud. His reflection in the mirror showing a man unraveling eyes bloodshot with frustration, jaw clenched in denial as he grappled with the internal conflict brewing like a storm, memories resurfacing of his upbringing in a working-class neighborhood where his father's law enforcement career had been marred by similar controversies, tales of necessary force that masked deeper animosities, influences that Derek had absorbed unconsciously, shaping him into the officer he was today, one who prided himself on toughness, but now questioned if that toughness was just a facade for fear and ignorance. Jamal, emerging from Torres's office with his belongings returned and an official apology logged, paused to address a cluster of officers who had gathered, his voice calm yet piercing. "This doesn't have to define us. It's an opportunity to reflect and improve." A direct challenge that hung in the air, thwarts the stereotypes by turning the incident into a teachable moment, his serenity acting as a mirror, reflecting back their own discomforts and prompting uneasy shifts in posture among the group. Torres, watching from her doorway, felt a surge of reluctant admiration for Jamal's poise, a quality she aspired to instill in her team, and she turned to Derek, who had re-emerged, looking shell-shocked. "You're suspended pending a full review, Lawson. Go home and think about what led to this." Her words laced with a mix of sternness and subtle compassion, recognizing that true change required addressing the human element behind the badge. Derek nodded numbly, the weight of the suspension crashing down like an avalanche. his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, defensiveness warring with emerging guilt, pride clashing against the dawning realization that his actions had not only humiliated him, but potentially damaged the department's fragile reputation in a community already skeptical of police motives. Driving home through traffic-clogged streets where billboards advertised unity campaigns that now felt mocking, Derek's thoughts spiraled deeper into self-examination, recalling a pivotal moment early in his career when he had ignored a complaint from a black colleague about discriminatory assignments. Dismissing it as whining rather than addressing the underlying inequality, a regret that now burned like acid in his chest, forcing him to confront how those small oversights accumulated into the larger mistake of today. His wife, greeting him at the door with concern etched on her face after a cryptic text, asked gently, "What happened out there?" And Derek snapped back initially with defensiveness. "Just a damn mix-up, nothing to worry about." But as he sank into the living room couch, the facade crumbled, his voice softening as he admitted fragments of the truth. "I arrested the wrong guy. An FBI agent, can you believe it?" The admission opened a floodgate. Memories pouring out of family gatherings where racial jokes were laughed off, of media consumption that reinforced stereotypes, all contributing to the blind spots that had led him here. A profound internal conflict that left him restless, staring at the ceiling long into the night, questioning the very foundations of his identity as an officer. Jamal, back at his hotel room overlooking the city lights that twinkled like distant stars, allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, calling a trusted mentor in the FBI to debrief. "It shook me more than I let on, but I turned it around, used it to plant seeds of change." His calm exterior during the ordeal, a deliberate tool to thwart expectations. Challenging the narrative that black men must react with aggression to be heard, instead opting for a strategy that disarmed through intellect and poise, a method refined through years of high-stakes operations where emotional control was paramount. The precinct, in the aftermath, buzzed with a different energy, officers debating the incident in low tones, some defending Derek out of loyalty, while others expressed quiet relief that it was exposed, a ripple effect that hinted at broader shifts. With Torres already drafting memos for sensitivity training, her empathy for Derek tempered by a firm resolve to root out such flaws. Derek, alone in his study later that evening, picked up his badge from the desk, turning it over in his hands as the polished metal caught the lamplight, whispering to himself in a voice cracked with uncertainty, "What have I done?" The question hanging in the air like a specter, teasing the deeper fallout yet to come. A personal reckoning that would force him to peel back layers of denial and face the man beneath the uniform, all while the city outside continued its indifferent hum, unaware of the internal storm raging within one of its protectors. The review board convened in a sterile conference room at the heart of the precinct, its walls lined with faded motivational posters about integrity and service that now seemed like ironic relics in the face of the unfolding scandal. The air thick with the scent of stale coffee and tension as stern-faced investigators from internal affairs shuffled papers and adjusted microphones, their expressions a mask of professional detachment, while the weight of evidence mounted like an unyielding avalanche, ready to bury reputations and reshape policies in its wake. Body cam footage played on a large screen at the front, the grainy video capturing every damning detail of Derek's aggressive approach in the park, the way his voice rose with unfounded accusations, his hand hovering near his holster as if anticipating resistance that never came. Jamal's calm responses juxtaposed against Derek's escalating demands, all time-stamped and irrefutable, drawing murmurs from the panel as they noted the lack of probable cause, the rushed cuffing, and the dismissive radio chatter that revealed a casual disregard for protocol. "This isn't just a misjudgment, it's textbook profiling," one investigator declared with a firm rap on the table, his voice cutting through the room like a verdict, supported by a stack of witness statements from park-goers who had filmed the incident. Their accounts vivid and consistent, the elderly woman describing how Derek ignored her questions about the necessity of the arrest, the young couple recounting the racial undertones in his tone, and even a child who innocently asked why the nice man reading was being taken away, humanizing the injustice in ways that statistics alone could not. Derek sat at the end of the table, his usual bravado stripped away like peeling paint, his hands clasped tightly to hide the tremor, defending himself in a voice that started strong but wavered under scrutiny. It was instincts, pure and simple. The reports matched, and he seemed evasive. But even as he spoke, the tapes rolled on, revealing slurs muttered under his breath in past calls logged from his patrol logs, offhand comments about those types in the park that painted a pattern of bias stretching back months, evidence pulled from departmental records that Internal Affairs had combed through meticulously, uncovering not just this incident, but a trail of similar complaints dismissed as unfounded victims who had filed reports only to be ignored, like a young black delivery driver stopped 3 times in a week for suspicious driving, or a community activist harassed during a peaceful gathering. Their stories now amplified in the review, transforming Derek's isolated mistake into a symbol of broader departmental failings. Jamal testified via video link from his FBI office, his presence commanding even through the screen, his words measured and impactful. This isn't about punishing one officer. It's about dismantling the systems that allow such actions to recur, ensuring that every badge wearer understands the human cost of unchecked assumptions. A statement that resonated with the board, prompting nods and notes as he detailed reform suggestions drawn from federal guidelines, mandatory de-escalation simulations incorporating diverse scenarios, annual bias audits using anonymous feedback from communities, and partnerships with civil rights groups to co-design training modules that went beyond rote lectures into immersive role-playing that forced officers to confront their blind spots. The board ruled unanimously after hours of deliberation. Termination for Derek, effective immediately, a decision announced with the gravity of a gavel strike, citing gross misconduct and violation of conduct codes, but extending beyond punishment to mandate precinct-wide changes, including the immediate rollout of enhanced oversight mechanisms like civilian review panels, empowered to investigate complaints independently, body cam audits conducted quarterly by external auditors, and a whistleblower hotline for officers to report internal biases without fear of reprisal. Derek crumbled in his chair as the verdict landed, his face ashen, the room spinning as the reality set in not just the loss of his badge, but the unraveling of his self-image as a protector, now recast as a perpetrator in the eyes of his peers, his mind flashing to the financial strain of unemployment, the whispers in his neighborhood where he had once been hailed as a local hero, and the difficult conversations awaiting with his family, who had always viewed his job through a lens of pride now shattered by public scrutiny. Outside the precinct, the community rallied in response to leaked footage that had gone viral overnight, protests forming not with anger-fueled chaos but organized resolve banners reading "Accountability Now" and "Reform for All." Speeches from local leaders highlighting how Derek's actions echoed a litany of similar cases, like the wrongful detention of a black doctor mistaken for a trespasser or the excessive force used on a teen jogger, stories shared in tearful testimonies that humanized the statistics of disproportionate stops and searches, drawing media attention that amplified the call for change, with news crews interviewing affected families who spoke of generational trauma passed down like unwanted inheritances. Captain Torres, stepping into the fray as a bridge between the force and the public, announced the reforms publicly in a press conference flanked by community representatives, her voice steady as she outlined the new initiatives. Bias training workshops led by experts from diverse backgrounds, including former victims turned advocates who shared personal narratives to foster empathy, community oversight boards with veto power on certain policies, and a mentorship program pairing veteran officers with recruits to instill values of equity from day one. Measures designed to rebuild trust, brick by brick, in a city fractured by mistrust. Jamal played a pivotal role in this transformation, consulting remotely and in person, sharing FBI tactics for de-escalation that emphasized dialogue over dominance, such as active listening techniques proven to reduce confrontations by 40% in pilot programs, and advocating for data-driven approaches like tracking stop demographics to identify and correct disparities early, his involvement lending credibility that quieted skeptics and inspired younger officers who saw in him a model of principled law enforcement. Months later, the precinct had transformed subtly yet profoundly. The bullpen now featured diversity posters, not as tokens but as reminders. Officers engaging in voluntary book clubs discussing works on racial justice, and patrol logs showing a marked decrease in unsubstantiated stops, with community feedback surveys reflecting improved perceptions, stories emerging of officers like a reformed colleague who intervened in a potential profiling incident, citing the training as a turning point. Derek, now jobless and navigating the uncertainty of civilian life, found himself volunteering at local anti-bias programs run by nonprofits, initially as court-mandated community service, but evolving into a genuine pursuit of redemption. Facilitating discussions where he shared his downfall as a cautionary tale, admitting to groups of at-risk youth, "I let assumptions blind me, and it cost everything. Don't repeat my mistakes," a path that brought tentative healing, reconnecting with estranged family members who encouraged his growth, and even a cautious outreach to Jamal via a mediated letter expressing remorse, though Jamal responded not with forgiveness but with encouragement to continue the work, emphasizing that true change was measured in actions, not words. The broader impact rippled through the community, with initiatives like youth mentorship sponsored by the precinct pairing officers with at-risk teens for positive interactions, scholarships funded for criminal justice studies aimed at diverse candidates, and a new park memorial dedicated to victims of injustice, a simple plaque inscribed with equality in action where families gathered for annual vigils, sharing stories of progress amid lingering pain, symbolizing not an end to struggles but a commitment to ongoing vigilance. Jamal, reflecting on the saga during a quiet moment back at his desk surrounded by case files that demanded his expertise, felt a glimmer of optimism amid the exhaustion, knowing that while one incident couldn't erase systemic flaws, it had sparked a chain reaction departments in neighboring cities adopting similar reforms, national discussions on policing amplified by his testimony before congressional panels, and a personal sense of purpose renewed, proving that resilience could forge paths to justice even from the ashes of adversity. The city, once divided, began to heal in small ways, a black father walking his son through the park without fear, officers greeting residents with genuine respect, and a collective narrative shifting from confrontation to collaboration, a testament to the power of accountability to birth lasting change. Ending on a note of guarded hope, where the scars of the past informed a brighter, more equitable future. One step, one policy, one transformed heart at a time.